Welcome to the A Life of Education podcast. So we're here with Keith and Matt.
Hello.
Hi there.
So Keith obviously wrote and developed our Anatomy and Physiology course for Allo, and then Matt was his sidekick. So helped out with all of the filming and obviously the storytelling, which you do.
The chit-chat.
And the chit-chat, which we love. So guys, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the course and about yourselves.
Yeah, so the course originally came from when you asked me to create a kind of lesson or in-person lecture for Anatomy and Physiology to teach a group of girls who are studying to become yoga and it was Pilates instructors, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The girls. So following a sort of introductory to Anatomy Physiology of movement, came up with the basics, and when it came to teaching the girls, it was fine, going through the physiology of the cell and the systems that they needed to know, the system that they needed to be aware of. It was all pretty good, but it's not my forte. My forte is a bit more of the mechanical, structural, musculoskeletal system. So when it came to actually presenting this on film, I realized we can do a better job if we recruit Mr. Matthew Cortterill.
Yeah, so I guess my background's more in the physiology. That's what my education was in anyway, certainly at the postgrad level. Mainly physiology of sport, but you can't really do the sport stuff without having an underpinning of all of the kind of biomechanical and biological and physiological sort of aspects of the body, really. So I came in and I helped out basically just kind of tweaking the physiology stuff, and then obviously presenting it and adding bits and bobs here and there.
Yeah, adding some beautiful storytelling.
Yeah, he did
to
it in a very different way. He did it through billions of years ago when the one cell
the
became
full-on
two
thing.
cells.
So I think when everyone gets a chance to have a look at the course, they'll be able to see how you tell stories about physiology, which is just, it's really nice.
Well, you lose the meaning if you don't tell it that way, I think, because I think that, I can't remember what I actually said, but I think I made the point on the actual course that when people come to learn physiology and anatomy, it's always done in a very fragmented sort of way. Well, dry to a certain extent. I mean, you can't really get away from that because it's just, you talk about bones and things. But if you describe it in a way that we as human beings are just kind of one step along kind of the cellular evolutionary path, a lot of things, even outside of physiology, just like when we're in the gym training, make a lot more sense when you see it from that point of view and you see the interconnectedness of it all. So that, your kind of skin is there for a reason, your heart is there for a reason, or to fulfill a certain purpose. Obviously to keep you alive, but to keep you functioning as well.
Yeah, nice story in there.
Sorry, I can't help it. See,
no, I know, you're just good at it. So Keith, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the process of creating the course. Did you find any challenges to that? This was obviously the first time you've ever developed a full anatomy and physiology course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in university, we had a very clear and concise structure to the way we were taught it, and we were taught it intensely in our first year of a sport rehabilitation degree from St. Mary's in Twickenham in London. And the aim in our first year was to weed out the people who weren't really serious about the course. So our lecturers piled it on us, and they made it as intense, as in-depth as they could, and they just asked us to just know it. You have to know it. And one of my lecturers said something very probably influential. He said, anybody can go out and practice and sort of know that this is the bicep and it goes from here to here, and this is the hamstring and it goes from here to here. But if you know your detailed anatomy in depth to the millimeter, to the corner of the tubercle on the part of the exact bone, you're going to be able to make that little bit more of a difference for the small percentage of people who have tried everything and who just have gone all the way around the block. He said knowing your anatomy gives you the foundation. It's like if you're trying to build a sports car and you just know that the parts go here, but if you know what each individual cog and millimeter and difference of the mechanics does, then it gives you a much greater understanding of what you're trying to build upon. So from that, I really focused on studying it when I was learning, and then when it came to creating the course, I studied it so hard. I remembered the structure we broke the joints down into specific order, and we broke the muscles down into a specific order. And from there, then the easy part was getting it all on paper. You know, researching here and there, that was fine. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew most of it. There was a lot of stuff I needed to get up to date on, like specific classifications of joints, which you don't use every day, which I forgot. And then digging into the smaller muscles that aren't such a big player in the real world gym environment. I needed to dig out on again. But the real challenge was the time. I completely underestimated the time it would take to create it.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a new appreciation for when you see like university courses or other courses and people develop them. It's a really long process.
Yeah, and you need to have it. It's all well and good just saying this is what it is, but it actually has to be in a way where you can convey the message to the students. So, and that happens before the lecture when you're talking about the learning outcomes. You have to lay out what are you trying to teach people, like what are they going to get from the course. Like the intro is, another one of my lectures said, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you tell them.
So maybe you can tell our students, what are people going to expect to learn from this course? Maybe Matt, you can start with the introduction. What will people learn from that?
Well, the beginning is basically the beginning. It's how you sort of came from a single-celled organism, kind of why, trying to get into the why of the evolutionary sort of path, which is obviously ridiculously complex, and biologists don't even really know up to this sort of day and age, but it's to kind of frame the whole thing. So you started off from this unicellular organism, you then evolved into more multi-complex sort of organisms, and again, this is what I was saying at the start. Here's why you have a heart. Here's why you have a cardiovascular system. So basically, it just kind of layers the foundation for then Keith to go and be like, okay, now here's like the in-depth, detailed sort of parts. Like here's the breakdown of it all in more detail.
So Keith, what do people expect to learn from? So you're basically presenting and developing the next three modules. So it's the upper limb, the lower limb, and the trunk anatomy.
Yeah, so after the intro, you get a basic understanding of, like Matt said, the cells and the systems. And then just talking a little bit about what a muscle is, what a bone is, the stages of bone, and the effects of kind of bone repair and bone growth. And then that kind of underlays that's the foundation on the musculoskeletal system. So the introduction is based around muscle contraction. What else did we cover? Muscle contraction, concentric, eccentric, isometric, different types of joints. So then you've got a basic understanding in the language that's going to be used as well, because the anatomical language is in itself a language. You talking about very specific points on a three-dimensional object that has multiple layers, and then that moves. You need to know the words that the language created needs to be very specific and very particular and very uniform. So talking about anterior, posterior, superior, inferior, superficial and deep, all these things created the 3D model that you're going to have to work with when you go out into your practice. So the introduction is based around that, introducing people who may not have heard of the language to basically what they're going to hear now when I go talking about it, because the thing about this kind of course is the pace has to be quite quick because there's so much to get through. So the introduction is probably one of the more important pieces to kind of get your grasp on, and then from there it's just into the mechanics and into this is there and this is there. So we started at the lower limb, we started at the hip and the pelvis, and we moved down through the hip joint, focusing on the actual joint. So we went from the deep out to the superficial. So we talked about what bones are there, what bones touch the head of the femur, the acetabulum of the pelvis, for example, and then the surfaces, how they shape up, how they move, the capsule, the ligaments, where the synovial membrane is, and then that structure follows through all the way. So for each joint we had the articular surfaces, the capsule, synovial membrane, synovial fluid, then the ligaments, and then after that, the next lecture then is the muscles that create the movement at that joint. So firstly, what movements are possible, and then secondly, what muscles control it and how the muscles work. So we went, for example, we'll stay at the hip, into the hip flexion. What are the hip flexors and where do they go, and where do they attach from and to, and what secondary movement they create. And then we just go through the joint, the muscle at each joint, or rather the movements at each joint: hip flexion, hip extension, internal rotation, external rotation, abduction, adduction, And in there, the muscles repeat themselves because one muscle does more than one job. So it starts to drill home the main muscles that do multiple joints, or rather do multiple movements. You repeat is kind of the only way to learn this stuff. So from there, moving down through to the knee, again, the surfaces of the knee, moving out through the actual joint structure, the membrane, the ligaments, the capsule, and then the muscles that work around the knee. And we just follow that all the way down to the foot, the ankle. And then the third lecture is the upper limb, the same thing from the shoulder all the way down to the fingers. And then the trunk is slightly different. The trunk is geared more towards stability and breathing and respiration, but the small little joints that are there, again, all the joints follow the same structure.
So I know this seems like a bit of a silly question, but why do you think it's important for fitness professionals to really know and understand their anatomy? And maybe, Matt, that's something that you can explain to people. Why do you think it's important that people do this course and that they understand anatomy?
Well, it's like a mechanic needs to know what a car is and what a car's built from.
Oh, good analogy.
All the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, these are the tools that you're working with. I mean, it's you're very much like a craftsman, like in the same way that like a sculptor sort of builds a statue or like a painter paints. It's you need to know the tools that you're dealing with. You need to know the thing that you're trying to mold, because that's how you're going to make the best sort of informed decisions in your sort of program. So if you don't understand what it is that the muscles do, how can you expect to then train them appropriately? And likewise, if somebody comes in with an injury and there's something wrong, if you don't know the ins and outs of the mechanics behind that, then you're not going to be able to diagnose the issue. And it goes all the way through into physiology. Like if you don't know why your body loses fat or the conditions that you need to set in order for it to lose fat, then how are you going to program effectively? Do you know? So this is just really understanding the human body, because that's the thing that you're trying to mold and trying to use.
Yeah, nice response. So what did you guys learn about anatomy that you didn't know before that maybe you can share with everyone?
Funnily enough, we had this conversation just the other day on our own podcast. It was the things that you sort of forget, just because I've been doing this sort of PT course. It was like you're going back and you're having to review the very basics again. So it was more, maybe not so much new stuff, but certainly reinforcing old things. We're like, man, I didn't realize that, or like completely forgotten about that. Like you're saying about the joints, the classifications of the joints and things. Yeah. And then whenever you go into like biology, like certainly from my lectures, the research kind of changes on a fairly frequent basis. And so when you're there trying to review the material again, no doubt something's changed since the last time you looked at it. So.
Do you remember a specific fact, Keith?
Well, let's see, go on.
I had to re-educate myself on the stretch reflex. I just totally forgotten about it.
So can you tell everyone what that is?
I had a feeling that was about to
Yeah, like, oh man, still haven't got it.
Essentially, when the muscle reaches its longest point, there's two ways to, when the muscle reaches its longest position, the Golgi tendons get stressed. They send a signal to the brain, and the brain reads where the muscle is, and it activates sort of a protective mechanism. But then the stretch reflex actually shuts down the muscle, so that when the muscle is creating so much force, the brain overrides the nervous system's activation of the fibers, and it shuts it off, so it doesn't tear the muscle or pull the muscle off the bone, which is something that I had forgotten about.
Okay, Matt, do you have anything specific that you remember? Thinking, oh, I didn't remember this.
Not so, but certainly something new actually. There was always a belief that you had, was it 10 times the amount of bacteria in your body than human cells, whereas going back and reviewing it again, apparently that was a little bit of a myth, and it's not quite, the discrepancy isn't as large. It's, what did they just say? It was an article that came out like Nature magazine maybe a few years back, where they were saying that if you had a 70-kilo man who was around 20 to 30 years old and was roughly like 170 centimeters tall, that you would expect them to have 30 trillion human cells versus 39 trillion bacterial cells. So more or less on a 1-to-1 ratio. That was that. But it's still like important to know that. But it was, like people always sort of bang on about it, how we're more bacteria than anything else, but which is still the case, but not quite to the extent that we once thought.
Yeah, I remember when I studied anatomy at university, reading this book called The Cell, and I don't know if this is outdated now, but I remember one of the chapters that I read, and it was talking about cells being put into a petri dish, and they were all like a liver cell, a gallbladder cell, a skeletal cell, and all of them finding and conglomerating together into tissues, just like that. And I had that, oh my God, like there's an intelligence that really exists on a cellular level that is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's why you shouldn't, people have this idea of bacteria being this sort of very simple sort of organism, which it is, but it's a lot more complex than what people suspect. And when they get told, like, oh, I have bacteria in my gut, or I have bacteria over my skin, they sort of think of it as this just thing that's there rather than something that's inherently part of who they are. And like the amount and the type and the activity of that bacteria can fundamentally sort of alter who you are as a person, like right from your mental health all the way down to sort of your physiological health. There you go.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to add to that, Keith?
No, I mean, with this kind of stuff, again, going back to repeating it, like just drilling it home in my head also reaffirmed a lot of the kind of the structural layout of the human body. I think I did get a lot out of it, even if it's just a recap for me to know, because it's all well and good saying I know my anatomy. Like I didn't know it all to recite it offhand, just like that from top to bottom. So by going through the whole system from the shoulder to the fingers, you re-educate, you reignite the parts of your brain that had forgotten all the small parts of the bone. There are little bits in your hand that you don't really speak about with clients. And I think one of the things, you were touching on, why is it important to know this stuff? And you kind of touched on that if you get an injury, you need to know how to troubleshoot and how to investigate and how to go through a process of elimination. But also you need to inspire confidence in your clients and in the people in your class that you really know what you're talking about. Because when you start to speak to people about their own body and their own mechanics, if they realize that you actually really know what you're talking about, you have their attention. They want to know. They may not remember. They might walk out of the session. They might forget everything you just told them. But when you have their trust and their confidence, they give you a lot more patience, and they allow you go through this process of elimination, because even physios and doctors have to rule things out. If you go to a physio assessment, they take you through a systematic process of elimination that starts with the conversation at the beginning, and then it moves into the testing when they move your arm or they move your leg around. But you need to know what structures are there to test for, to rule out. And that's how you eventually find out through the patterns as to what it is wrong, or what's not working, or what's not activated, or what's too stiff. And you can't get there if you don't know it all.
Yeah, I think it's also really important, again, touching on the point that you mentioned before, that this is your chosen field. As a fitness professional, you've now embarked on a process where this is your career. So to be really knowledgeable about what you're actually doing for other people is really important. It helps to elevate the whole profession as a whole. And I think that's really valuable. Yeah,
for sure. Even just from a business perspective, it helps you stand out from everybody else. Like particularly here in Dubai, like the amount of trainers out there who just don't know their anatomy, they don't know their physiology is crazy. Because they're saying like that's the job, like that's what you're using.
Yeah, well, this is in essence why we started a life of education for that reason. So
yeah, to try and just give people access to information that they may not have, because it's difficult here. It's difficult for people to find. People want to learn in this industry. Like people are in it to help people. They're not in it because they want, an easy life, or they want a lot of money, or they just want to, they're in this because they want to help people. And they started an education process and they got to a certain point. And then some people kind of go off into the world and that's it. They do enough to get by or whatever. But there's a lot of people who really, really want to learn. So that's what we're hoping to do with this, is give people a more in-depth understanding of what we can help them with. And that, for me, it's the anatomy and physiology stuff.
So maybe can you guys give us a little bit of a tip for other people on how they can learn their anatomy? So obviously both of you know your anatomy really well. So how can other people really learn their anatomy well?
I think it's first off, try and find the medium that you learn best from anyway. Some people can sit there and read books to like no end. Other people need sort of audio books and all the rest of it. But I think certainly on things like YouTube now, there are so many like fantastic videos that describe kind of in depth every single process of the body. And I think I saw a TED talk the other day where they had basically created all this digital animation of like some really in depth kind of cellular stuff. So it's, yeah, find what medium suits you best. Like, don't sit there trying to learn from a textbook if you know that you're going to suck at it and you're not going to retain a thing. That'd be my advice. Yeah.
Keith?
I think understand firstly that it's a very difficult subject to get a grasp around. So don't let it overwhelm you. Firstly, start off with knowing your bones and knowing the different bony prominences on each bone to begin with, because those bony landmarks are bumpy and curvy and sticky outy for a reason. There's something's going to pull on it. So when you know your bones, you basically know your blueprint of what's going to go into it, what's going to pull on it. And when you know the bony prominence and you know what part of the bone it's sticking out, if there's a structure coming around the back or the front, you know what way it's going to move the bone when it contracts. So for me, that would be my suggestion. Understand the skeleton and the bony prominence, and then from there, when you're reading the areas that the muscles and the ligaments and the capsule make contact with the bones, or where they originate or insert, you know exactly where it is. You don't have to look it up. It makes life quicker and easier, but you can build on knowledge and you can layer it on top of itself.
Yeah, I have a few things to add to that. I learn anatomy really interactively. I love to watch videos. When I was at university, just being in front of a cadaver was like, it's amazing.
That's the grade A. Like, actually just go and see it.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, because it's what you think it looks like in a textbook is so different to what it actually looks like in real life. Also
how it feels as well. Sorry to interrupt you, but like the fascia and things like that as well. Like, you suddenly get an appreciation for how elastic and kind of how sort of tightness can come about when you sort of get dehydrated or whatever else, and all these sorts of things, as you well know.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate to go to King's University and look at cadavers. It's a privilege. It's a little bit scary when you first go in because it's quite a little bit overwhelming, but
it really is an amazing tool, especially studying the human body.
Yeah, I mean, you get to know how difficult it is to really identify it, because on a picture it's all colorful and it's different shades and it's labeled. When you look at a cadaver, to put it this way, but it looks like just a tree log until you really, really spend time identifying the different layers.
I find as well that on cadavers it's a very similar color, and so you have, like you were saying before, you look at a textbook and it's got different parts of the brain, and you've got the temporal lobe is green and the occipital lobe is blue, so you can really identify it. But when you're looking at a structure and it's all the same texture and it's all the same color, to identify the different sections, it's very different. It takes a very refined eye and a lot of analysis.
Yeah, you could, if you're fortunate, if I was fortunate in 2012 to be able to go to an exhibition by Dr. Gunther van Hagen.
He's a creepy dude.
Yeah, who's the German guy who takes cadavers, implastinates them, and creates pieces of art, essentially.
Nice.
So you'll walk around the exhibition basically, and you might see pictures of it online. You'll see a muscle, a body with just the muscles with its arm out, and it's holding its skin. And it's real skin, and it's real, you can see the hairs on it. It was once a living tissue from somebody who donated their body for that purpose. But if you know your anatomy and you want to spend some time, you can go to a knee. You can just stare at a knee for 15 minutes and you start to identify, because there is some color differences. You can see positions kind of in an upright position. You can see where the origins and insertions are of the muscles around the knee. And for me, I remember I was fortunate enough that we did it in 2012 in London in the O2 Arena, and for the knee in particular, it helped a lot. I actually got to see, okay, because you're looking at something with no label, so you have to figure out, is that, and then you need a global mapping of the area, and then to say, oh, that is that, okay, great. I sort of have an idea now of how this works in a real system.
Yeah. So if people are just entering the fitness field, and obviously they've just done their PT course, now they're doing anatomy and physiology, what would you guys recommend would be the stepping stone for their career progressions? How would they go from there?
It's in what? So they've done their PT course, now learning the anatomy, and then what do they do after that?
What would you recommend? Yeah, so people can understand a little bit of a path. So I've done anatomy. What's next? What would you recommend? Because both of you have been in the industry a long time. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Well, start training people. Start getting some experience. Like don't go in the deep end and start trying to rehabilitate severely injured people. Like, just start off with your family members or your friends or whatever else. Like, start building up a portfolio of people that you've started to train, and then when you feel confident, now start charging money for it. I'd be hesitant to get into that straight away. I mean, I worked for free for years before I got paid for doing this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
And it was...
In Australia, we have something that's quite nice. It's when you first enter the field and you're very new, we have student rates. So you would charge a student rate. You're a student teacher. You're not fully qualified yet.
That's smart. I mean, that's the way barbers and hairdressers do it. When you're in barber school, you're there learning, and you charge a cheaper rate. It's all organized on one evening.
And you, as a professional, you get paid less as well. So you get paid a student rate. And that, I think, really helps people to understand, okay, now I'm here, I'm progressing to here. And so they do become fully qualified, there's a little bit of a financial incentive for them as well.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, work for free or charge cheaper rates, and just offer your time to go and help people who are smarter than you and who are kind of going to mentor you to some extent. I mean, I think that's certainly the route I took.
Keith, what do you recommend for people?
I think when you graduate, you have a very broad knowledge of a lot of the different aspects of training people: weight loss, muscle gain. You probably touch on some pregnancy, pre-postnatal. You go into a little bit of nutrition, but you're really only scratching the surface across a huge array of subjects. So at the beginning, you sort of feel like you know a lot, but I would suggest continue to get yourself on courses. Go on, even you're never above learning. You're never above bringing something new to your brain. Go on a kettlebell course, go on a TRX course, go on a weekend course learning about how to rehab your shoulder, because these people who've created these courses are experts, and everything has its place. So whether you think you as a person don't use TRXs or you don't use kettlebells, there's going to be a client who comes to you where a specific TRX exercise or a specific kettlebell exercise is perfect for them. So you go to a nutrition course, you might think you know sort of a lot about nutrition and you know the fundamentals, but when you get somebody who's really tried everything, what else can they do? Can you help them? Because at the end of the day, everyone's different. So everyone's going to present with a slightly different case, and what works for one person isn't going to work for another. So if you can avoid narrow tunneling yourself and expose yourself to as many different skill sets, you don't have to always use them, but there's going to be a time where you can pull out that from your repertoire, and you can change someone's life with a simple changing of the knee position by using a piece of kit that you never knew existed before you went on a weekend course.
Yeah, I also think that the industry changes quite a lot, particularly with science. So things like nutrition, we all know that 10 years ago everyone was saying one thing about fat, and now everyone's saying something else about sugar. So the industry changes a lot. So I think it's important for people to continue to learn and develop themselves so that they are keeping up with science and keeping up with the trends of now and what's relevant in this day and age. Do you agree?
Sure. No, yeah. But even I think over time as well, trying to develop not a solid sort of philosophy, but certainly a steady philosophy, so that when you do go and learn and you do encounter different bits of research in nutrition, because like nutrition goes back and forth the whole time, that you're not just constantly changing your opinion with every turn of the tide, that you're sort of developing some sort of rigor from all the learning and from all the experiencing, so that things kind of tweak your mindset and tweak your philosophy rather than just constantly getting pulled one way or the other as well.
Yeah, I mean, we used to speak about it before, myself and Matt. These courses, they all have golden nuggets, and they can either teach you something brand new, or they can teach you why something's been working that you've been doing very well. Do you know? So as a coach, you might find, if I do this with this type of people, I get great results. And then suddenly you go on a course and it tells you this is exactly why. And then you know you're on the right track. Keep going, keep doing the thing. You've got an eye for it. You've got an intuition for it. And yeah, just keep adding to your brain. Just keep putting new information in there.
Yeah, or they can, you go on some courses and they can actually teach you what's wrong. Like you might hear somebody say something, you're like, nah, that's not right. And then through them explaining it, maybe they do not such a terrible job of it, but it just helps reinforce in your own mind, like, yeah, he's just tried to explain that thing that I know to be not quite correct. And the fact that I'm just here and I'm hearing it again has just reinforced in my own mind my own position, So it's, you got to expose yourself to as much as possible, I think.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of what you're talking about there?
So the area of core training, for instance, is one that you sort of you hear all the time. Like in previous PT courses and things like that, they'd always discuss like the benefits of unstable surface training, for instance. How if you want to improve somebody's lower back pain, they need to activate their transverse abdominis more, And so to do that, you would need to go on to these Bosu bores, and you need to sort of do all this unstable surface training. And like even within the last few years when I've been on courses, they've still said that sort of stuff, which I believe to be incorrect for a variety of reasons. But then hearing them try to explain it.
Can you go into why? This is
okay, well, the whole thing is, okay, so first off, why does more activation matter for anything? Because you don't live your life like that. So for instance, the example I always use is like if you're there playing rugby or you're there playing football, you're not going to run around constantly contracting your abs and trying to keep your transverse abdominis tight. And so it tends to be, which is the case for pretty much most muscles, particularly in movement, is you want the force to be there, but you want the timing to be there as well. So you need to go through this period of relaxation and then contraction with the right amount at the right time. And lo and behold, you get that more from doing things like compound movements or heavy loaded movements or explosive movements. You tend to get those sorts of adaptations by training that way, and the unstable surface doesn't really matter all that much. It can certainly help. There are certainly environments that it can be useful, such as with what Keith uses with some of his rehab, where you're balancing on a rope, for instance, But it's not the be-all and end-all, which a lot of tutors in the past have tried to claim that it would be, And so, again, like hearing them talk about that, it's like, no, you've just reinforced in my own mind why that's probably not the correct sort of position.
Yeah. So, Keith, do you have any examples like that as well, where you've used your anatomy knowledge to be like, oh, that's not so true?
Very definite one that people come out of the course with. And I came out of my first night course in fitness instruction as well with this philosophy of never let your knees go in front of your toes. And
yeah, I've heard that loads too.
Which strangely people are still saying. I've heard a couple of PTs, even recently. Some of the gyms here, and they're like, wow, really, that's still a thing.
Yeah, people say it a lot in yoga too.
Yeah. Yes, I've heard it in yoga.
A huge.
And there is a time when you shouldn't let your knee go over your toe when you have anterior knee pain, and that exact movement causes pain. So that's enough of a reason to go, okay, we're not going to put your knee over your toe. But to push people through conveyor belts of PT courses with this idea that if in a healthy knee, your knee travels in front of your toe in a lunge or in a squat, you're going to degenerate the back of that knee to the point where you're going to get knee pain. That it doesn't happen that way. It's more so that if the knee can travel in front of your toe and you're not getting knee pain, you need to maintain that movement pattern so that the back of that kneecap never gets painful in that position. So
basically that's a myth, right?
Yeah, I think it's just an overcautious way of making sure that people coming out of courses don't hurt people's knees, because knee pain and back pain are the most common injuries. like in a general population world. So I can understand. I completely see where it's coming from. It's coming from, look, let's protect these people, and let's not have new trainers going out to the industry and hurting people.
But I think just from teaching courses myself, I know that sometimes you really need to give people the most conservative estimates, because if I say to someone, okay, you can do this, the way that people interpret something can be very different to what's actually being dictated. So sometimes I may say to somebody, do this because it's safe. And I know that in their mind they're going to take it 30% even more, and that in itself can be a little bit of a challenge when you're teaching people that are very brand new to the industry. So from a course developer point of view, I can sympathize with why sometimes people who develop these courses can be more on the cautious side. What do you guys think about that?
You do have to err on the side of caution, but if you have somebody who they need to move, they need to put their joints through new ranges of movement, and you're holding them back from an end range that they're actually going to go through when they sit on a chair, when they sit on the toilet, when they go downstairs, the knee is going to travel. We need to get the knee strong in that position. We need to get them, we need to work whatever joints are available, or rather whatever movements are available at the joints. And I think how that can translate into a session is, you have somebody who's practicing a lunge for the first time. It's a difficult movement to do, with or without a coach standing beside you, recreating every minute thing you do. So as soon as your knee goes over your toe, to be told, no, you're doing it wrong. Why? Oh, because I say so. Okay, fine, well, I'll try and do it another way. But the new person is trying to absorb multiple teaching points. Keep your chest up, keep your weight in your heel, keep this, keep that, keep your knee behind your toe. Like, this person is in brand new environment, and they're being kind of almost critiqued on what they can and can't do. So I think a little bit of freedom is always useful, as long as it's not causing pain at the beginning. And then, so let the knee travel over the toe. It's not going to break them. If they complain of knee pain at that point, there you go. There's your red flag to stop that exercise and regress. And then instruct them, keep your knee back. Does that change? But I think it can just make some sessions a bit difficult with people who are starting out, like as in clients who are starting out. It just makes them feel a little bit more inadequate than they really should be.
Yeah, but I mean, that whole issue as well is just a fundamental misunderstanding of physics. I mean, and that would be like another point. If okay, once you've done your PT course, just go and learn some sort of physics, like real basic level lever system physics. Because if you have somebody who's trying to lean back or trying to not get their knees to travel over their toes, it means they're going to have to lean back even further. Now, sure enough, that problem probably also has some sort of lower back pain. If their knees are that jacked up, and like 99% of the population is maybe because they've been sitting down for too long, then they're probably also going to have lower back pain. Now, like this goes back to secondary school physics. If you have a lever system and you have a line of force, when the line of force travels down the axis of rotation, there's no force happening on the axis, so on your joint. So that's fine. So okay, you've chucked your hips further away from your knee, so now your knee's safer. But you've taken that hip joint way back, far away from the line of force, thinking like gravity's going straight through the knee joint at this moment. So now all of that pressure is now getting transferred onto the hips and the lower back, which is what we call like a Romanian deadlift. Like, we then position the hips in a way that then the hamstrings and the glutes can take the brunt of that, and that's why you feel it more in the hamstrings and the glutes. But the second you drop those hips, now all of those lumbar vertebrae, they're now the joints. All those little facet joints, they're taking all the force. And then when you do that in like a loaded position, like now you're just, okay, you've saved the knees, but now you're going to jack up the lower spine.
Okay, that's quite interesting.
Does that mean?
That's a weird one to explain without a drawing.
Essentially, I know what you're trying to say is, if the knee can't travel over the toes,
then the pressure is going to go elsewhere.
The hip and the pelvis is going to be very far behind your heels.
Yeah.
Which is basically going to mean you're going to fall backwards. So what people will tend to do is they'll lean extra far forward with their chest to keep the weight of their upper body back in line with their center of gravity.
Yeah, so your shoulders are literally over your knees to compensate.
Yeah, almost horizontal, yeah.
But if you were to do the math on that, okay, now there's nothing going through your knees or your shoulders, but now everything's going through your lower back and your hip.
Yeah, really valid point. Do you guys have any other myths that you've seen your anatomy really be able to assist with going, oh, that's not quite
yeah,
right?
I think it's kind of along the lines of Matt with the unstable surface. From a rehab perspective, and this is restoring minimal function, not taking people to top end kind of performance output. You need an element of an unstable surface, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to go to a BOSU or you need to go to a wobble cushion. You can create instability on a hard surface by playing around with an in-depth knowledge of anatomy. Sorry to come back to that, but a simple lunge with the heel off the floor destabilizes the ankle, creates instability at the ankle joint where you might have an ankle ligament injury, or creates instability at the knee, forcing the knee ligaments to respond with greater activity to feed info to the brain. But you're on a stable surface, mimicking the stable surface that the majority of sports and activities are played on. So racquetball, tennis, they don't bounce around on unstable surfaces. It's a stable floor with an unstable, it's a stable base with an unstable movement. So I think when you get towards the higher end of your sort of your anatomy knowledge, you begin to understand that if I actually bring the foot into plantar flexion, I'm changing the shape of the talus in the bottom of the distal talofibular joint. So from there, I can create instability. But I don't have to stand on a BOSU for that.
Yeah.
But that's higher. That's I know. I appreciate that's at the greater end of the kind of the knowledge spectrum.
But it is a really simple thing that people can do. Like if you say to someone, okay, well, just lift your heel up. It's a lot more. It's quite simple.
It's simple, and but people always be told in their thing, you must have your weight evenly dispersed on the floor, which is true, because if you take a brand new client and you ask them to go on the toes, they're going to hate the session. They're not going to enjoy it. And they're not, what they're also going to do, and this is where you have to get the balance correct, and this is kind of touching on to what Matt does. When you destabilize the surface, when you destabilize the joint, you reduce the amount of maximal power that the muscles can do just by physics. Do you know what I'm going with this?
Yeah, for sure.
So if you have somebody squatting on a Swiss ball, because of the instability on below their feet, they can't take as heavy a weight on their back. So their muscles aren't working to the muscle's full potential. So you're going to reduce the amount of benefit you're going to get from a power output. Can you explain that differently?
No, you pretty much nailed it there. I mean, it's the same thing as, say, running on a cushioned surface or having too big a sole in your foot. It's like, okay, great, like we've reduced the impact. And this is the same for pretty much like 99% of treadmills out there as well, where they have this floating deck that kind of is bouncy, basically, for want of a better word. Is that okay? It's great. The impact's reduced, but you've also reduced the amount of force that you can impart on that surface, because the second you push harder, all you're doing is pushing the treadmill further down, say, right? So you can't apply as much force. But then also, you're then going to have a softer surface, so then you're going to create more kind of instability around certain joints, say like the ankle joint. In which case, if you're running and you're running for like a seriously long time, like, you know, in a mile you're doing 1,500 steps or something. That's a lot of wiggling and wobbling for the ankle to take. And so then that's going to just pull on the Achilles the whole time, and that's where you get this sort of kind of whiplash of the ankle to a certain extent. And so you need stable surfaces, A, to produce force from a performance point of view, but also to produce force from a safety point of view, to keep the joints that are supposed to be stable, right? I
have an analogy that might help with that. I've just remembered. I tell people this with the shoulder joint. If you imagine you're trying to shoot a cannon out of a canoe, okay, you put a canoe in the water, you put a cannon on top, and you light the fuse. When the cannonball shoots off, the canoe is going to dip down into the water, and the cannonball is going to go only so far. Now you take that cannon and you put it on the riverbank, and now you shoot it. How much further is that same force going to send that cannonball? So that's the kind of difference between training on an unstable surface from a force generation perspective and training on a stable surface. If you're trying to train for power output, if you're trying to train for sports, you got to really identify what the main goal of the training is.
I think when you say like power output, that's the operative word there, because it is. When you're training for other things and your goal is something else, then yeah, it's different. But for power output, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But that's where you see.
Wait. Sorry, explain that more. What?
Like, for example, something. Say you don't want to. You're not training for power output. You're just engagement. That's it. And you've got certain muscles that are not engaging or not being activated. Say if you're thinking about really small muscles in your feet, you're thinking intrinsic muscles of the feet as opposed to extrinsic muscles of the feet. So you want to do something a lot more subtle. Then it's a very different.
But I'd say you're still training the same thing there. You're still training power output. Because it goes back to the same thing of what was the point I was making before?
About running on a treadmill?
Nah, it's before that.
It's a good time to forget.
No, but so, okay. Yeah, more or less running on the treadmill, yeah. So you want certain muscles to fire at the right time, right? The timing. That was it, the core stability sort of stuff. Okay? Yeah. So, okay, activation's great, but you want it to fire at the right time, okay? So even with the subtlety of the foot, say, although the reason why you say it's subtle is because it's like a smaller muscle and you're not necessarily going max force. But like maximum force doesn't necessarily mean maximum power, say. But it's this balance of velocity and force, right?
Yeah, but it's also the speed of engagement that these muscles contract.
So the speed of engagement, so that's power, right? Does that make sense?
To add to that?
Yeah. So the speed of it. So you're still training power output, and this is precisely the point. And that's precisely that sort of defends my point about the core stability even better. It's like, you're still training for power output and things like that, even when you're thinking about the subtlety of certain muscles, because you want them to fire at the right time, in the right way, with enough force that it's now going to stabilize all the bones in your foot.
But I think if we take it all the way down and strip it, sometimes it's just there. And I'm sure, Keith, you understand that when it comes to rehab, there are some times where it's just, okay, not the power output, but we're just looking at engagement.
Well, I think you're both on the same point, but you're just looking at it from different ends of the spectrum. Like, it's training the nervous system to activate the tissue in the right combination and in the right order to react to a wobble left or a wobble right, say, and then to activate the right muscle. So that neural pathway needs to be active and in tune and fired up. And then that, it's sort of like it's on the power in the sense where it might be, for an arbitrary number, it might be 5 or 10 watts of power compared to the single leg explosive jump that's 110 watts or whatever. So I think you both have you're on the same page. So a strategy at the lower end to increase your nervous system's input and output can be like an unstable surface, but very quickly that becomes time inefficient.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the engagement is the power, but the reason why I pick up on that point is because when people use the words force and power, they think the big jump, they think like the big sort of heavy squat, and so then they say, well, I don't want to do force training and power training, I just want to do the engagement stuff, you know. But it's that fragmentation that leads to the whole philosophy of, well, I'll then just go on a Bosu ball because I just want to train the engagement, but it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's
just on a separate continuum.
Point.
Yeah.
I can't remember what was the original question.
Well, we were talking about myths, like things that you guys have been able to see in the fitness industry, but because of your background and your knowledge of anatomy and your knowledge of physiology, you've been able to say, okay, well, that's not quite right. So anatomy myths, that's the topic.
Right, okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting conversation, to be fair. We've done well, I think.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, like Matt, up until that point where you said people fragment it, like, you're right. Like, in my mind as well, it's very fragmented. And now that, like, you've presented that point, I can understand that, yeah, if I don't fragment it, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, and I won't get into this too much because it's pretty much my series of lectures, but it's that interconnectedness of everything, of the muscles, of the rest of the body and the environment that it's in and all the rest of it. It's, if people had that understanding, training and things like that would become a lot simpler. And certainly the explanation of why certain things happen would be a lot simpler. And that goes for pretty much all of life things that you experience.
Yeah, I think, like, to round it up, anatomy is just such a fascinating subject and topic, and we could talk about this for ages, because the human body is so complex and intricate and amazing and wonderful and very complicated.
Yeah, and it's hard to even get near understanding those if you don't understand the scaffolding. Like, if you don't understand what you're made of, you can't understand the full potential of what it can achieve.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything to add before we go?
Nope.
No, I just think if you're doing the course, good luck with it. It's a lot to take in, so just be patient with it and don't be overwhelmed by it, and just get a grasp in the language and the skeleton, and then everything else gets a little bit easier if you follow the structure that we go through in the talks.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for taking part today and that great discussion.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Bye.